Hi, everybody. Cynthia Allen. Move better, feel better. It's time. Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. Thanks for coming back and joining us again for this track on grace while aging. And I'm very pleased today to bring to you Anat Baniel. Anat is a clinical psychologist, dancer, author, and somatic pioneer. She was born in Israel to a scientific father and a poetic naturalist kind of mother out in her garden and enjoying herself. So she's had a lot of nice variety of influences in her life. And then she went on to train many years with Dr. Feldenkrais and then founded her own work called the Anat Baniel Method. She is the author of Move into Life, which is a fantastic book, and another book I'll show you a little bit later. She's collaborated with leading neuroscientists and doctors such as Dr. Michael Merznick, Martha Herbert, and Jill Bolte-Taylor. Probably that last name everybody knows by now. Maybe the others might be a little less familiar to some of you unless you're more in the science realm. But for those of us a little more interested in science, those three names are going to pop up right away for people. She comes to us from San Rafael, California. Hi, Anat.
Hi, Cynthia.
It's good to have you.
Wonderful to be with you.
And I do love your roses in the background and the beautiful light that you've managed to get on them there. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, this is a great topic, and I love the title you gave it, which is what dare I expect in this whole process of aging, which, you know, as I've said in some of the other situations, I'm 61, so I'm kind of wondering myself, what can I dare in aging? And yeah, so when you were thinking about this topic, what are the thoughts that just first start popping into your mind?
Well, what came to my mind is when people want to hear about aging and of course about possibilities or what to expect. It's the world of expectations that has been built for many, many years as to what aging means and what it looks like and what kind of losses we should expect. And a lot of it is like, don't dare expect much. Oh, you're that old. Are you crazy to wear a short skirt? I don't know, I'm giving a silly example. Or you know, I was told when I was 28, when I wore something bright red, that I was too old to wear bright red when I was 28. So
absurd, isn't it?
Yeah, and our belief systems really organize our world and organize, you know, what influences deeply what happens to us in our life and what we're able to notice. So I just thought, you know, with the Feldenkrais method, with my work, with the, you know, ABM, Anat Baniel method, neuro movement, we live in the world of possibilities and making the impossible possible, or the believed to be impossible possible. So I thought, let's go for what's possible rather than delve on while acknowledging, you know, reality. It's not about kind of la thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what got me to suggest this topic.
I love it. I love the spin on it that you're giving us. And I guess, you know, since there's been some years that have passed since you studied with Dr. Feldenkrais to now, maybe you could just give us a little bit of a snapshot of this incredibly rich life that you've been living, and particularly on the professional level.
Okay, so I'll talk about Moshe, which is Dr. Feldenkrais, but for me it's been Moshe. I met him first when I was 3 years old because my father, who is a scientist, you mentioned, met Moshe through the scientific community and in the 50s, and when I was 3 years old, after he met him, he decided he was the first actual live genius he met and organized a group of his researchers to come to my parents' home, living room, and do a movement lesson, the awareness for movement lessons, once a week, because he was building them, he was creating them, and he needed to experiment. So I remember it very vividly till today. I mean, there was something about him that just, when he came through the door, I just was impacted. Fast forward 4 years later, my father signed me up to study ballet with a ballet teacher. She was Russian. She used to be a professional ballerina in the Kirov Ballet. that studied with Moshe and did once a week what the little girls called the lesson on the floor. And I really took to it like fish to water. I mean, it had such profound influence on me, but I didn't have any meta vision on it. It was just like I was a child. I was 7 years old, right? So I just had the experiences that I had. One of which was possibilities. I found that after each lesson, the next day was gymnastics in school, PE. And I would come and be able to do things spontaneously that I could never do before, like the splits or handstands or, just stuff. So, but I didn't think about it. And then fast forward, I mean, my father went on sabbatical in Berkeley, and I stopped studying with this ballet teacher. We moved. And then I went to university where I studied psychology and statistics for undergraduate. And the reason I mentioned statistics is because it became very relevant to what I do today. And then I finished that and went to graduate school and decided I want to study clinical psychology. And when I started studying that, I went like, wait a minute. I want something with the body, something with feeling, something with sensation. It was, the psychoanalytic approach, which had a lot of value to it. And at the same time, there was just things there. I just went like, no way. Doesn't make sense in a real way to a biological life system. So I started searching for 6 months, and then gradually the memory of the lessons on the floor came back. I called my father and I said, is Feldenkrais still alive? And he said, as far as I know, he is. So I said, where can I find him? He said, look in the Tel Aviv phone book. So I looked at the Tel Aviv phone book. I found Moshe. I took my first private session with him, and my life was changed. And I remember feeling he opened the locked box in my soul that I didn't know I had. And that was like, and I just felt it, and I knew it on a feeling level, but I had no sense. And then I was studying in grad school. I took a course in neuropsychology, and my teacher, she was actually German, that fell in love with an Israeli guy and lived in Israel. And she did her PhD in Stanford in neuropsychology. I told her about it. She actually summoned me and said, Anat, you're different than all the other students in the seminar. So we became friends, and I took her to watch Moshe give me a lesson. And we went out. She said, he's working with your brain. He's talking to your brain. And we're like, wow, I never even thought about it. Fast forward, I waited a year and I kept working with him, taking lessons. He opened the training in San Francisco, which I took. And then back in Israel, I started going, watching him work. I just watched him work. He let me do that. Because my money, I ran out of money. I was a student, but he let me watch. And then when Amherst came, he needed somebody to travel with him. And his brother approached me and asked me if I would travel with him. And I said, sure. And that was just like, one day when I have time, I'll write a book called My Travels with Moshe. It was just like one of a kind, remarkable experience. We became very, very close friends. And it was I was in my 20s. I was in my early 20s. He was in his 70s. But it was like, it was magical. I got him. Of course, he saw me, and so on and so forth. And then what happened that was very, very important, became very important in where I am today, was while I was traveling with Moshe, we stayed at this woman, Jane Parsons, on the Upper West Side while we were in New York. And this little baby, 13 months old, Elizabeth, was brought to him. And Elizabeth cried all the time, and I picked her up and she stopped crying. So he asked me to hold her while he was working on her. And that happened one day, second day, third day. And without telling me, it was a very Moshe-like thing. When we were in Amherst, and how all those things happen in life, he didn't work with a lot of children, but there was one 11-year-old girl he demonstrated on in a workshop, which, by the way, I was there too, but I wasn't in the article, with CP. And on the stage made a huge difference for her, as a demonstration. And an article in Smithsonian Magazine, you probably know this article, came out just about that time. And so kids started coming. And what he did, when he was in Amherst, he said, I will see your child once if then you go work with Anat. Didn't tell me he was doing it. Kids started, I was called, however they found me. I don't know. I was there, assisting him. And I just had to make sense of it. He did not give me one instruction, one directive, nothing. And I had such profound trust in him that if he asked people to come to me, then I was going to do it. So I guess and I wasn't afraid. I was just like in wonderment. I was like, okay, what do I do here? What do I do there? But the thing that happened was the children changed. There was this profound connection with the children. And they popped. And then, Amherst continued. I moved to the States a year or so later. I don't remember exactly the timing. And through Elizabeth, children started coming. So I worked with, Tanglewood Music Festival, dancers, Joffrey Ballet dancers. That was my work. That was my background. But then the children started coming. And when you have a year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, I had on my table, it's like their whole life. Making a difference is a huge shift in the trajectory of their future. And after a few years, and I kept working with adults, and I also worked with people who had stroke and so on. So I had kind of like the two extremes. And I asked, what about what I'm doing? Because I know it's not very nice to say, but really what went through my head is, as the people in general, but especially the children popped, I went like, this shit works. And after about, I would guess anywhere from 6 to 10 years, I can't tell you because it was just one long flow. I asked myself, what's the shit? I knew what I was doing, but what about what I was doing was making the difference? And of course, I was sitting on the platform of Moshe's teaching, but he didn't give too many details. He didn't, and I worked on that. And then my first came, the outcome was the 9 essentials that I talk about. And one of the things that Moshe said, I forgot because I'm talking about him, and this is to a community of teachers. In our travel, at a certain point, I won't take too long the story, he looked at me and said, do not let anyone ever tell you how to do your work. He didn't say my work. He didn't say our work. He said, don't let anyone ever tell you how to do your work. And when Moshe, and he didn't say lots of things like that. He wasn't like telling me how to live my life. It was amazing. And so I was just connected to my own inner experience and my ideas. And then I had insights and so on. And at a certain point, and the story, doesn't matter the details here, I had the vision of how to move forward with training people that was really influenced by how my work was with children. And I was going to change it to fit the model of my understanding. And I knew it was the brain. So I kept looking at the brain and brain plasticity. And when, around me, people weren't really doing it much. I think people were saying the word brain, but it was like, really, how are we impacting the brain? What's the potential of the brain? How are we harming the brain's ability to change? I was looking at it from all directions. And at a certain point, it got to where and as Michael Merzenich, when I met him and he read my first manuscript to my first book, he invited me to talk with me. And he cross-examined me pretty much. He wanted to know, and after, I don't know, an hour of that, I don't remember exactly, he looked at me and said, Anat, you have elaborated the work to the point where it has its own distinction. It's its own thing. So it's an evolution. My feeling about Moshe is just profound love, admiration, and a sense of enormous, just almost magical luck to have had this path that I just described to you. So, and I'm very pleased to, connect with you, and you're so gracious. And so I keep looking at you, and his book, Body and Mature Behavior, I think you represent really positive maturity.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
my hate of you, is positive maturity. You have this simplicity and ease and directness and Very nice, very nice.
Thanks, I appreciate that. As I listen to you talk about it, one of the things that I pull out for me, and I don't want to make this all about Moshe because everything lives beyond him, and so we don't want to get caught in that because people are tuning in that didn't know him. That's not as important to them. But I do feel like one of the things that you said early on, and I'm hearing from over the last 3 years of doing interviews with people who studied directly with him, is this quality of his connecting with younger people in a way that was never condescending. That really, like I often hear this, he got me. And then I think this implicit, I also hear from you this implicit message that he gave to you, which is you got what you need. I call this, you've got what you need to do this life, but you've got what you need not only to do this life, but you've got what you need to do this work with these children. And then I would assume that you then turned around and passed that on to these children and to these other adults that you worked with, that they've got what they need too.
Yes. And I think it's more than that. He never said to me, you got what you need. He said to me, don't let anybody tell you how to do your work. He protected me from being constrained either by academia or by Feldenkrais people who had their own ideas, or, he saw what he saw in me. He wanted me to move. But he said one other thing that, he did say to me. He did some work with me. It doesn't matter. It was an interaction. And he looked at me and said, Anat, I'm giving you my power in the world. Mm-hmm. So he didn't say you have what it needs. He said, I'm giving you. He was, my experience, I felt like he put his foot on my back. It was towards the end of his life. And he said, okay, you move forward. And in that sense, keep generating, then in that sense, you have what you need. Yeah, I agree with that part. Yeah. I never thought about it in those terms. I saw it as like, okay, what's possible? Problem solving, what's possible? But staying really authentic and true. The thing that I got most from Moshe, if I would say that I value most, and that is part of what I would like to bring in this interview to anyone. You don't have to have known him or even necessarily do it through our work. I mean, it's the access to the self-authenticity. To know what I feel. Then I can make choices. I can make choices to do something that's not exactly what I feel most I want to do, because I have other considerations. Like you have a child and they need something, and so it's not about, I'm just going to do what I like. And it's nothing about that. It's being true to yourself. But in order to be true to yourself, you have to know yourself enough. Mm-hmm. So it's really about self-knowledge. It's about self-discovery. And I'd say it upfront before you've asked me too many questions, is that a calling and that option is never too late to do.
Yeah. Because and I think that's really important to say, because in this topic of aging, I suspect you're going to help us understand that the way we might redefine aging has a lot to do with knowing ourselves.
I mean, 100%. Yes. Yeah.
So, I guess, I guess as you might have sort of alluded to earlier, we sort of have these expectations with aging that are mostly about decline and loss, and maybe not as much about some of the other aspects of aging. So how else could we define aging?
Well, if you permit me, I wouldn't even try to define it. The only way I would say is increasing the number of years we've been around, So I wouldn't call it aging, I would call it age, because aging implies all the associations. So if you look at it, we age from the day we're born. If we are really, I have my scientific side to me, you get older from the moment you're born. So you don't call a 1-year-old aging, you don't call a 30-year-old aging, you don't call a 40, usually 5-year-old aging. 50-ish, maybe you will start calling it. You look at a 61-year-old person, most people, especially younger people, will call it aging. And if you look at an 80-year-old, you say, old, they're not even aging, they're past aging. They're already stuck old kind of thing. So I would, first of all, you know, we have no choice but to use the words people use because that's what people are. But I want to challenge even the word aging. So, what do we do as we accumulate years, as we get older? Because 2-year-old is older than a 1-year-old, but nobody thinks of them as being old, right? So what do we impose on it? So what was your question? I forgot.
Well, my question is really, is there another way or to define
To
define a criteria for aging? I mean, I agree with you. I find it so fascinating that.
Well, I think the criteria, okay, so let me say something a little bit. Let me go back to when we were born with about 22% of the number of connections that our brains will have at around age 25. So about 1/5 of our brain. We do 4/5 of the growth of that in the first 4 years of life. Then we fill it in, you know, and we lose and we add and we lose and we add, and it's very dynamic throughout life. So that's called brain plasticity, right? Or brain change. So what you see, so babies are amazing and miraculous, and you know, and if they're healthy, they don't have a problem, but they have very little, initially none, but very limited motor control. Their thinking, you know, has to evolve. Language has to evolve. So you see, you know, limited abilities, right? Skills, abilities, and so on. And then so it's a curve that goes very steep, and then, you know, teenage and so on, and then if you go to college or you learn a profession or you have a family, enormous amount of learning continues happening, but not so much intentionally at a certain point and not at the same rate. And then we tend to reach a plateau where we have our life down, right? Let's just make it up. It can be in any version, but we got a job, we got a partner, or we got married, we have a child, or we don't have a child, but we have our life, right? And we have our habits, lots and lots of habits, which we need to have. And what stops the point of what people call aging is when the rate of creating of new connections and new possibilities, new patterns, slows way down, and the habitual takes way over. So in the curve, so if you take two curves, in the beginning, there are very few habits or none, right, except reflexes. And you build habits, you know, so this is the growth of new connections, and the habits start coming up and coming up. At a certain point, you're kind of like here, usually around the late 20s, mid 30s, somewhere like that. And then it tends to go the other way. The habits get deeper and deeper and deeper. We get, and when we don't create new connections, we actually start losing connections. Then we groove in more, we lose. That's the dynamics of the physiology, neurophysiology of the brain, in very rough terms. Aging is when we go this way. So let me give you a concrete example. They've done research that shows that people in their early 20s, when they really measure it in ways that you can measure more specifically, when they check on balance. So one of the things that old people we know tend to suffer from is a reduction in their ability to balance, right? Do you know that it's in the early 20s that they start seeing with most young people is going down? That's how early aging starts for balance. Then when you think about a belief systems, so kids, you know, wake up on Monday and they believe that, I don't know, the sun is their mother's friend, and they wake up on Tuesday. I mean, they are creative, they're imaginative, they're unreasonable, they are, you know, they are all that stuff. And then, you know, but by the time depends on the upbringing, depends how forceful and rigid the upbringing is. But some people, by the time they're 12, 8, have some belief systems that can influence life in powerful ways, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. How easily can you form a new belief? How easily can you change it? With a healthy 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, anything you tell them, they go, oh, really? You know, it's like, okay, whatever you say or not, you know. But when you go with a 30 years old that was born to believe that, you know, this about women, that about men, this about myself. This is one of the most painful things that people can live throughout life. Very hard to change. I'm no good. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to get what I want. I mean, I have a number of friends that their whole profession is working directly on people's belief systems. But belief systems are also, I mean, you know, professionally with other people, but belief systems are a neurological configuration. Thinking is a highly organizing mechanism of the organizing the body and the everything. So
can I just say, I think that's important to repeat that a little slower. So I think you said belief systems are a neurological organization.
oh, absolutely. Thinking is real, you know, because it doesn't have a direct, concrete, mechanical, you know, correlate to it. It's kind of like the thing that happens and we don't know if we're thinking or not thinking. I just finished teaching 9 days to my graduates on movement, thinking, and cognition. And to really understand the relationship, and we form thoughts. We form habitual thoughts, which are not really thoughts anymore. It's just a habit. It just runs, because thought is something new, a real thought. And that's one of the most powerful identifying factors of older people, is that they're rigid in their thinking. You go to some people, you know, I hope my daughter doesn't feel that 100% about me, but you go back home to have dinner with your parents and you know you know what they're going to say next. And the tone of voice is the same and the thoughts are the same and you know, it's just totally rigidified. You go with somebody, you know, younger, you're hoping to hear more variability. That's aging.
Right. I mean, I really like this definition where the habits are now, the way of acting in the world is much more habitual than any possible new connections. I mean, that makes sense to me. And I also, I've seen some of those studies that show that the loss of balance can start on a very basic step test, certainly in the latter 20s and 30s, which is shocking, right? Most of us don't feel that tipping point in ourselves until much later. So what is it we can do that would allow us to maybe shake this up so that we don't get stuck in this habitual way of being? I would think some of your 9 essentials would be handy here.
They are the 8 of it for me, at least, and a lot of very highly supported by the, you know, current neuroscience research. I would take away the word shake it up. I hope you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all, please.
There's nothing to shake up because you have what you have at any given moment. And so people say, you know, right now, of course, the situation, people are not doing it, but travel more, you know, do this, do that, which is all, you know, do new things, you know, brush your teeth with your other hand, walk backwards, not just forwards. I mean, all of that is good. However, and yes, I'm not denying that. And then there are ways to really create conditions that the brain can't help it but start shooting new connections. And those conditions are my 9 essentials. Now, I'm not saying that I've defined it perfectly accurately or that it's the only things, but this is what, when I asked what about what I do works, I took a year to observe and analyze, you know, what I've done with different clients. And that's what I came up with. And that's what got Michael Merzenich really, really, really interested in me, because he said that I defined more or less accurately the last 30 years of neuroscience research about plasticity. So I think that's pretty cool. So we just, by the way, had him on the phone with the 3 other people. We're about to start. We're working on collaborating a huge project, and if it's happening, I'm going to let you know.
Oh, I want to know. Absolutely.
Yes, it was so inspiring. I mean, I'm so big that I had to actually, I didn't have time, but I felt like I want to take a day or 2 break just to, you know, talk about new brain cells. I can feel it's like a physical sensation. I need new connections to be able to manage this, you know. Anyway, so the essentials, the very, very first essential, that is like the overarching essential, is movement with attention. And we move. As long as we're alive, we move. And that tension, and that's the part that's very often hard for people initially to grasp, is that tension to the feeling of self, to what you feel. So if you're in an exercise class, excuse me, and you get an instruction, you pay attention to the instruction. I mean, you listen to your teacher. But the moment you start executing it, the most powerful, important part in your doing it, if you want to use movement as a mechanism, I have the notes of what Mike said yesterday, just a few feet to the side. I didn't even think I was going to say, to utilize movement for progression and recovery. That's what he said. He understood I'm doing. Yeah. So you use movement to create new possibilities, to get your brain to actually literally upgrade its own functioning, is to pay attention to what you feel as you move. And that can be any movement. You take 2 minutes, 4 times a day. When you decide, when I make the coffee, and I'll pay attention to the fingers on my left hand on Monday morning. I'll pay attention to the fingers of my right hand on Tuesday morning. I'll pay attention to my fingers in my left shoulder. Oh, I'll pay attention, next time I do the coffee, I'll pay attention to my pelvis, the back of my pelvis, spine, breathing, feet. It doesn't matter, it's pretty much doesn't matter. Once you do it, the whole operational mechanisms in your brain shift, and they shift into a mode of shooting new connections and discovery. The same process that a child, newborn, and a baby does. Babies don't wake up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm supposed to learn how to crawl, so I better pay attention to my left knee. I mean, it doesn't work like that, but they are all in their sensations and feelings, and they notice, the outcomes of what they do, and that gives the brain the information to learn. So that's my first essential. And that alone will youthify anybody.
Okay, I love that. That will youthify anyone. That's perfect.
Yes.
And I think it is really true. That's what we hear, right? When people start really engaging in this way of learning, is we often hear how everything seems new, not just their own body, but how they observe their children, their spouses, the world around them. There is a kind of instant lifting of sort of the years away. Yeah.
And everything seems new because it is new.
It is.
You see, it is new. When the brain figures out something new, think again of a child that learned to say mama for the first time. Everybody would agree it's totally new. If you get your brain going into that mode, then when it does it, it creates new stuff. And one of the experiences of being old is like, oh, I've been there, done that, boring, exhausting. And movement with attention to the feeling of self begets more movement. It wakes up the whole mechanisms that get us to feel like moving. Mm-hmm. So, because one of the things that happens in aging is we move less and less and less. And, right. Movement becomes more enjoyable. I can talk about a few more essentials. So that, because they work all together, it's, yeah.
And we can definitely go on there. I think that one of the things that recently struck me is someone introduced themselves to me in an online group by saying she was an elderly 61-year-old. And I went, oh, okay, I'm 61. Mm-hmm. I've never used the word elderly in connection with myself. Yeah. Is that me in denial, or is that something about how she's experiencing her life, right?
Certainly the latter.
Yes, the latter. I think so, the latter, absolutely. So yeah, continue on and give us some other ideas about how we can revivify ourselves.
So another essential, which will be very familiar to all the Feldenkrais community, is slow. And slow is very, not just underestimated, but also has a lot of negative connotations in our culture. If you go to a synonym a dictionary to look at slow, it's mostly negative stuff. deft, this, that. I mean, not good. Slow, or let me put it from a neurological point of view, fast, we can only do what we already know. That means the habitual. To create something new, when we need to move, when we need to take action, we are always going to, and we need to move fast, we'll go to what's already more deeply grooved in. Slow gets the brain's attention, allows us time to feel, and promotes enormously the waking up the brain to create new connections. So one of the now, when we are youthful, when we are strong, when we are able to do certain things, part of the health of the nervous system is being able to do it quickly. So generalized slowing down is one of the symptoms of aging. That we don't have the ability, that if you think of the biochemistry and all that, it's one of the symptoms of aging. However, when we want to counter that, we don't go to try to make people move fast, because it will just jam the brain. It won't be able to do it. It will actually inhibit even further. What we want to do is to bring attention to the feeling of self as we move slowly, so the brain gets the opportunity to, again, this was a term that Jill Bolte Taylor told me a while back. She said, Anat, what you do is you wake up people's brain. You wake up people's brain. You go everywhere and people's brain wake up. So, but we don't wake up by clapping loud or fast. Another place where this mistake is done is with rehab. So somebody, for example, had stroke. Now, before they had stroke, they could just go and reach the cup and do it quickly. Now they can't. They lost too many connections, and too many neural networks, complex networks have been disrupted. So if they're going to try to do it, they're going to get more spastic, and that's what they're going to learn, right? So I won't let them even try to do it to begin with, because I don't want them to learn I don't want them to learn their failure. I want to recreate the possibility for doing it. So but the thing is that we think, people that are good in sports, they do it hard and fast. So if I want to get good in sports, I've got to go hard and fast. No, you get to hard and fast, and you know that very well. So that's the slow. And do it slow to get fast, and so on. And that is very unfamiliar to most people. And to do it intentionally. And again, you don't have to go to a new city to do it. You don't have to even sign up for a class if you don't want, but you have to take it on to slow down and notice what happens to you when you slow down. I mean, Tai Chi is all about slowing down. It is a whole system that uses slow to get transformation to happen. The other one is reduction of force. One of the staggering things that I observed years ago is when people get older, they actually use more force, because when the system gets disorganized, the relationship to gravity, like the balance thing, is not as good as it used to be. The fallback mechanism is to put in more effort to get the same outcome. So when somebody's old and they try to get out of the chair, and they don't move the head forward enough, and they don't do what it takes to do it easily. So again, the idea is to look how to do things where it feels easier to do them, both in terms of movement, actual mechanical movement, in terms of communication. Don't work so hard, or don't try to, people say, to control so much, and for some people, that'll be the first time. You might be in your 80s, 70s, 60s. You do that, the novelty is so much bigger than just going to another Hilton in another city. It is a real wake-up call on the brain. And that's why I said we don't want to mix it up. We want to move in a direction that we deliberately call upon our brain to function in a much more useful way. And Mike Merzenich did the research. He always does it with other people, about maybe 5 years ago or so, where they did it with rats that were close to the end of their life and they couldn't do, the wheel, and they couldn't do the maze. And basically what they did is what all those things do is they increase the brain's ability to notice, to perceive differences. And the perception of differences is the source of information to the brain. Many people make the mistake of thinking that the stimulation is the information. They equate stimulation with information. Stimulation is noise. Stimulation by itself is just irritation to the system. It's the brain's job is to notice this versus that, this versus that, this versus that. So what I only mentioned 3 of the essentials, but what all the essentials do, they amplify and facilitate. They amplify differences and facilitate for the brain to notice differences. And that's the bottom line of what the brain does. And it's so simple, it's ridiculous. It's the basis for intelligence. It's the basis for organizing any action. So
I feel like I'd like you to talk just a little bit more about the distinction between stimulation and noticing differences. I feel like that's not going to be clear to some of us. So I'm stimulated. Well, stimulation must be something different, but it's not necessarily the ability to notice differences, is what you're saying.
It has nothing to do with the ability to notice it. It's just it.
It just is.
Okay, let me give you a few examples. One of them is going to be, okay, we're talking about aging. Years ago, I read an article, one of those little in the science section of the New York Times or something, little, a little tiny square that tells it. So they did research, and I don't remember the details anymore, but what they did is they took elderly people, I don't remember what they did, but they put inside their shoes rubber soles that had little bumps. Mm-hmm. And they didn't do it for the reason I would do it, and they got some outcome. I don't remember what it is, but what they discovered is that their balance got better. They didn't expect their balance to get better. And they interpreted it in some cockamamie way. I don't remember their interpretation. I said, hey, you guys, one of the things that happens as people age is they get desensitized. The stimulus comes in, but they don't notice it as much, right? All the senses tend to get, kind of more muffled, so to speak. But it's not just it's not just the hearing it's what the brain deteriorates in its ability to perceive differences. And that's why the Michael Merzenich's Brain HQ and the Fast Forward program that he did with Talal for children with reading difficulties, reading and writing. Or if you look at what they do, they slow things down, and they look to amplify differences until the point that the child feels them, perceives them. This is what they do. And this is what Mike, when he read my book, he loves my essentials, because I defined it in a very simple way, but he understood it. They built, Fast Forward has been used by over 15 million children by now. This is, it still should be hundreds of millions, but anyway, so his Brain HQ is a training for the brain to get more alert and capable of noticing what comes in through the senses. So, the eyes can get cataracts, then the information that coming in gets deteriorated. You get less of or if the ears don't work as well. But so much of what we think is the eyes and the ears get weak. It's not, it's the brain that got weak. And the brain got weak in the sense of its alertness and ability to perceive differences. And what the essentials do is they reverse this process. And they work also for a 1-year-old. Especially, I work with so many children with special needs. So the reason putting those things in the soles of the feet got people to have better balance is because the brain was able to notice what was going on better. And if you don't perceive a difference, it doesn't exist. If I don't see the difference between your amazing, I don't know what to call it, the fuchsia pink color and the blue color of this lovely fan to your left, I don't have fuchsia and I don't have blue.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been working with somebody who in web design who doesn't really see colors very well. I mean, he's doing cleanup work, but he doesn't see colors very well. So every time I go out there, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? And he's like, well, I can't tell the difference between that black and that blue. But to me, it's like a huge difference, right?
Difference, exactly. So you have children. We're just working now with a child that had the fluid in his ears, and it took them quite a while to discover. And so if you have fluid in your ear, what you hear as an infant and a baby is whoa, 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 like that. This is too muffled for the brain to be able to perceive this versus that. Do you know those children, many of them end up being on the autism spectrum? And what I figured out autism from my point of view, not why children are become autistic. And anyway, I can go on. And this April, I forgot her last name, did gorgeous research on that with, 3 to 5 week old infants and catching where the brain is lacking in its ability to perceive differences. They call it signal to noise ratio, and created a way to amplify anyway. And she gets the brain to recover, and those kids just do fine. But if they don't do it, they have 94% predictability of problems with reading, writing, socialization, and delinquency later on.
Wow, that's impressive.
So that's the same thing for aging.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing for aging. Mike was moving towards aging and did a lot of, now he's old kids and children. I mean, that's where he and I are totally linking, because he says it's the future of humanity. We've got to take care of certain things. So let's move to the next one that gets us.
Actually, I'd like to pull it around, because I mean the 9 essentials are fantastic, and you actually have a giveaway for people that will take them through the 9 essentials in a lot of depth, I think.
We have an ebook, just about the 9 essentials. We have actually 2 ebooks. So if by any chance anybody in your audience has a child or grandchild or knows of a child that has challenges, we have the 9 essentials for adults and the 9 essentials for children, because that's really how to use the essentials with your child, basically. So, and I think we also give a couple of free movement lessons. I'm not sure. It'll be all on one page. Yes.
Wonderful. So you just look down below the video right here today, and you'll be able to click on that link and go out to Anat's site and sign up for those. So that's fantastic. You also mentioned that I mentioned earlier that you have more than one book. So I talked about Move into Life, but you also have the book for children, which is Kids Beyond Limits, which I actually recommend to a lot of people. So I think you'll get something out of her 9 essential handouts, but then you might also be interested in those books as well. And then you have something else coming up, Anat, that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, because of the topic, I have a 5-day workshop called, Vitality, Anti-Aging, and Well-Being. And in it, we have 11 neuromovement lessons, what I call my work neuromovement lessons. We have 8 lectures. We have a lot of demos, little demos in there. And I think I did a little exercise of hands-on, so people would learn, because in our culture right now, people are advised not to touch, especially not strangers, but we should touch more. We should touch a lot more. And there are ways to touch that is a wonderful, it's a whole language, it's a whole communication. And you don't have to be a practitioner to do it, to start using the essentials in touch. And that is also so healing for the brain. It's really wonderful for the brain. So this is the workshop, and we're offering it, I think, with 30% discount. I don't know, with some kind of discount.
Mm-hmm.
So guys, if anybody's interested.
Yeah, so click below and you'll be able to get access to those things through Anat. I'm sorry, through Anat. And Anat, I wonder if there's a quote that's maybe inspiring you these days that you could share with us. We've been asking speakers to just maybe share something that you use in your life right now.
The quote I love, Cynthia, is we are born to die unfinished. And this is part of our unique human quality. We have a gene in us that makes it that we never close the conversation. For us to be healthy, actually really be healthy, we need a brain that keeps learning, that keeps creating new connections. That's the source of our, or at least important part of the source of our vitality. And the quote is by Stephen Jay Gould. In one of his books. He was an amazing evolutionary biologist. So when we talk about aging, and we age, but by using the essentials, by continuing to move, by continuing to literally grow from the inside out, we get healthier, we get more vital, and it's also a lot more fun to be alive. So that's
a lot more fun to be alive. That's great. Yeah, I think it's a fabulous quote for us. Really, it is. It's such a trap to think that we are supposed to arrive somewhere and settle, right? I mean, there's certainly something nice about being content with what one has, or not being in a place of grasping, but that's not the same thing as being available to continue to learn, to be curious, to wonder, to take in.
And I would maybe shift the word available to proactively, kind of passionately be after it, wanting to, just wanting to. Yeah. And if certain circumstances change, because when my father is now 101, my father did his last invention and startup when he was 93. Now he used to still walk, hike, twice a day for an hour. He doesn't do that at 101, but he still gets The Economist every week, and he gets L'Express in French, and he reads articles, and we keep our world full at any given time. Mm-hmm. And if you have maybe never done that until now, well, that's going to be the new connections you can create. Learn small step by small step into we are born to die unfinished. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So Anat and I are very happy to have had you here in Move Better, Feel Better. And, keep tuning in for the rest of the talks in this track. They're all quite fascinating with very different angles. Thank you so much, Anat. We're going to say goodbye now, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.